This is House Planning Help episode 179. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Cath Hassell from HPH179 Consultants as we talk sewage and how you might exactly deal with that on your own project. I'm fresh back from the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre. They've had their summer show there and I was able to do my Designing a Passive House presentation. It's the first time I've done this and I really enjoy putting it together. It's fun doing presentations, but quite a bit of work. I always forget that. So it was fairly late on in the process where I was thinking, is this holding together okay? And I had a chat with Harvey after I was finished. And what's great is the shows that they hold, it's either 3 or 4 times a year, are getting bigger and bigger, meaning the attendance is getting busier and busier. So hopefully that's a really good sign for self-build. But I also bumped into someone who said, Ben, do you have any chance to work or write or do things at House Planning Help? And that is something that we've put a call out for in the podcast in the past. The thing is, I haven't got anything at the moment, but I love to know who's out there, what skills you bring to the table, because it's the way I like to recruit people who get what this is all about. It's a huge head start, and you probably have a rough idea of the mission that I'm on here. So I think at the moment it really falls into 3 categories. The people that I imagine would work well on the website. So either you've been in the media, you've worked in TV, radio, or for a newspaper, and you're interested in making content relating to sustainable housing. That's perhaps one group of people. Then there are those in construction, people like low energy architects who are really passionate about educating, getting the message out there. Or it could come from maybe you're into teaching and you just really like sustainability, construction, or even climate change, and we want to be doing more of your work there. And actually, Robin, who's working for me now, he got in touch the last time I did a shout on a podcast, and he's been helping me for the last, it must be 6, possibly longer, 6 months or so, and has been doing a really good job while he's been doing a loft renovation. So that's the other thing. He's actually on there, seeing it, doing it, and has been spending a lot of time there. So hopefully at some point I'll get a chance to go and see. I hear all about it, but I haven't had a chance to see the finished product. So yeah, we'll put mention in the show notes there just to get in contact if that's you, and then should something come up in the future, I will know who to turn to. Let's get to our featured interview for today with Cath Hassell from HPH179 Consultants. And she's been on the podcast a couple of times before. We talked about saving water, also rainwater harvesting. Today, it's the topic of sewage. And this is actually something that one of our hub members, Andrew Miller, was asking about, various different sewage treatment options. So we'll get to that. We'll start with some basics and then get towards Andrew's question. I started by asking Cath whether there's a sensible place to start in this topic of dealing with sewage.
So the sensible place to start is if you've got connection to mains drainage, then use it. I think that's the sensible place to start. I think the next sensible place to start is that reduce the amount of stuff that you put out into the drains. So obviously that's just water efficiency. Yeah. So you're just going back to the water efficiency side. You've also got the situation, have you got combined sewers or have you got separate sewers? So separate sewers are 2 sewers. One takes foul water, foul and wastewater, and one takes rainwater. If you've got combined sewers, so they're mixed together, and they take both. And the reason I'm telling you this, and the reason that that's important, is that we want to keep rainwater out of combined sewers. That's really, really important, to keep rainwater out of combined sewers. So if you've got combined sewers, deal with the rainwater on your site. Yeah. Now, I would still say, even if you haven't, even if you're going into separate sewers, still deal with rainwater on your site. But it's of paramount importance, if you've got combined sewers, to not add to that load.
How do we know what sewer we have? Is this just a case of contacting the authority?
Yeah. Contact your local council, your local building control. They'll be able to tell you whether you've got combined sewers or whether you've got separate sewers. Yeah, they will know. Yeah.
And you mentioned about connecting to mains if we can. Because I was going to say, is composting toilets the absolute basic, that actually if you could do that and you liked that? Why are you laughing?
I'm just laughing because I do get a lot of sort of queries about this, or I meet very nerdy people at talks that I do. And they'll say something, oh yeah, I really want a compost toilet, but my wife doesn't want one. And I just think, well, I can understand why your wife doesn't want one. Yeah. Or, I really want one, but the kids aren't too pleased. There are so many low flush, dual flush loos out there. Just use a low flush, dual flush loo. 4 litres for full flush, 2.5 litres for half flush. Just use that. Yeah. That whole thing about don't sweat the small stuff. Somebody once said to me, it's sort of quite interesting, and this is Louise Hailstrap from Centre for Alternative Technology, and she said this to me years ago, and she said, there'll be people panicking about a small bit of poo, we must have a compost toilet, and yet don't compost all their vegetable waste and stuff like that. If you're on a site and you don't have access to water, therefore you're going to be reliant on rainwater, and maybe you're in a really dry part of the UK, sure, fine, then maybe you need a compost toilet. But otherwise I wouldn't bother. There's compost toilets, they take up space. There are a lot of compost toilets out there that aren't really composting toilets, and so therefore they're called dehydrating toilets, and so they require electricity to sort of dry out the poo. Yeah, I wouldn't bother with a compost toilet. I really wouldn't.
Getting the sewage off the site then, is it just a pipe going downhill? Is that simplifying it too much?
No, it is.
And how do you get it right
going downhill? Well, you've got the building regs. So the building regs will tell you get 100 mil pipe, you'll just come off. If you're doing single house, you'll be coming off in 100 mil pipe or 110 mil pipe. And I think you just lay that as a 1 in 40.
That rings a bell from my research, 1 in 40.
Okay, yeah. 1 in 40, yeah. So you just dig a trench, you drop the pipe in it, you have to put gravel in it and to embed it in. I'll tell you one thing I would say to you, Ben, actually, is that if we're going to start talking about drains, let's talk about the materials that we use for the drains. Ideally, you don't want to use PVC drains. UPVC pipe, you've got to lay that in gravel, and you've got to cover the pipe with gravel before you backfill it. With clay, you can just backfill with site earth. So that, depending on if you're on a really tight site and you've got to dig out that earth and then you've got to get rid of it because you can't put it somewhere else on that site, then you actually save money there. Clay pipe can just be, it's called super sleeve, it just has plastic connection. So it's really easy to connect. I spec that on my jobs, and it's pretty much, it always gets taken out and just UPVC pipe gets put in instead.
But why does it get taken out?
Builders like to use what they always use. So builders are always using UPVC pipe. They've got it. They've got all the different fittings. They've got to come to your job. Suddenly you're saying, well, I want clay pipes. And then they'll have bits left over, because what you do on site is you always order in more because you don't get held up because you haven't got a bend or something, or you haven't got the right fitting. So you'll order more, and then you'll come to the end of the job, and then you'll have a whole pile of clay bends left, and you're not going to do that on another job because all the other jobs want UPVC drainage.
How does it connect to the mains sewer then? Or is it always different?
No, it's not really always different. You just take it to your boundary and they will just make the final connection. They don't want you messing around with their sewers in the street. So they'll just say to you, you've got to bring it to the site boundary, and then we'll connect it from there.
But there's nothing like where you have to join at this point, or, oh, you've missed it, you're going to have to go all the way down there. It's take it to your boundary, we'll deal with it after that. Well,
yeah, because your sewers will be running in the road. If your site's a really strange site, yes, you might have a level issue going on, yeah? But the sewers in the street, they're always low enough so that you can either go straight into them or you can just drop into them at the front of the house. I almost feel like we should go out into the front of the house right now, open up a manhole cover and have a look at some drains. But it's raining, so maybe we won't.
I was about to say that you try. I'm sure last time I interviewed, or maybe the time before, you tried to get me to go down the sewage pipe. Now, what happens to it once it's gone into this mains drainage system? How long can it go on for? Because, I mean, it can't go down forever.
The fall on the sewers is tiny. You wouldn't notice the fall at all. Like, I've been down the sewers. It's absolutely brilliant, but you don't feel like you're walking down a slope. If you look at guttering is laid at a fall of 1 in 600. Okay? So you can't actually see, when you look at the guttering, that it's got a fall on it. But it's got a tiny, tiny little fall on it. And what happens with the sewers can go for miles and miles and miles. And then what might happen is that they then get to a point where they can't go any deeper, or it's uneconomic to build them any deeper. And then they will just have a pumping station at that point, and then that will pump it up to a higher point and then just let it run again. And certainly one of the things I know that Yorkshire Water, they spend a lot of money pumping their sewage. Yeah.
And you're trying to avoid this because no doubt this is more complex and it costs money.
It costs money. And yeah, it's more complex, but it costs money. But you kind of don't need to worry about that because the sewage system is already there.
Yeah,
it works.
We're getting distracted.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to chat about it because
maybe afterwards.
Talk about the poo that's in there, which is even better. But it's like, it's already there. It works. What I think is the important thing that you need to think about if you're a self-builder listening to this is it combined or is it separate? And it's so important not to put rainwater in if it's a combined sewer. I think that's the main thing that you want to think. It's there, it works. You don't want to overload the sewage system. There'll be very few areas where you are having to build where the sewage systems are overloaded. They only get overloaded during rain events. That's when all the issues happen. So all your foul water that you're putting in has got to be treated. If it has to be pumped at some point along the sewer system, that's going to take energy. To treat it takes energy. Therefore, the less water, even foul water and wastewater that you put in, the better.
So let's have a think now what happens if for some reason we can't get to the mains sewers. And I've had a question here from one of our hub members, Andrew Miller. I'm going to read what he's written, or just a small section. One thing I'd love to hear on the podcast is about sewage treatment. Apparently, new regulations are now in force, meaning that septic tanks no longer meet the criteria, and you have to go for more expensive sewage treatment plants like the biodisc system. So something on the various tests you need to do on site as well. We're likely to need a percolation test, contamination report, definitely stage 1, hopefully not stage 2. Then there's the SUDS design, etc., etc. I think before we go into that in depth, because I lost the trail, you can see Andrew's obviously done his research here.
Yeah, he has obviously done his research. He's obviously been told. Yeah, he'd obviously thought, oh, great, well, I'll just have a septic tank and that'll be fine. And I think that often people think that a septic tank doesn't have anything after it, or it's just a
hole in the ground.
It's just a hole in the ground, and it's not. He is correct. So basically, in 2006, the EU passed groundwater directive, and I suspect that in 2006 they also passed the surface water directive as well. But the groundwater directive is sort of why he's talking about there about septic tanks. The UK, as usual, dragged its feet, but it did finally put it into law. And that is basically about protecting groundwater. And what used to happen is that if you weren't on mains drainage, if you were on mains drainage, you'd still connect to mains drainage. But if you weren't on mains drainage, and there's 800,000 properties in the UK who are not on mains drainage, so it's a large number. If you weren't on mains drainage, you would just put in a septic tank. So what the septic tank does is it basically settles out the solids. So basically the poo. And some of that will sink to the bottom and some will float to the top, depending on what type of poo it is. And that will form a crust. And basically then you rely on anaerobic bacteria within the septic tank, which will breaks down the poo, and it breaks it down. And then you get an effluent that goes out from there. And that effluent then has to be treated in another way. And what you used to be able to do is you could just put a septic tank in, and then you could just basically have what was called a soak away. You could then almost have just like a pipe in the ground, and it could just soak away like that. You could have what we call a drainage field, which would be a whole series of slotted pipes in a sort of herringbone pattern that would be laid across the land, and it would soak down through there. And what happened with a lot of those systems is they failed. Now, you wouldn't feel in the house that they'd failed, because basically in the house you flush the toilet and your poo goes away and it's like, oh, that's great. But what is happening is that it's actually contaminating the ground in different ways. So it might be just flowing underground and going into the groundwater. There were regulations about you couldn't be in what we call ground source CPZ Zone 1, so protected Zone 1. But, you know, the thing with groundwater or with water underground is you're not 100% clear how it moves sometimes. So I think they're finding that there's groundwater contaminated where, okay, we didn't really expect this to be contaminated. The other thing that will often happen with a drainage field is that eventually it will clog up, because if you don't maintain the septic tank and empty the septic tank enough, that crust at the top goes lower and lower and lower, and then it just starts going into your drainage field. So it just starts to block up. And the whole point about the drainage field is that it's supposed to just be effluent. It's supposed to be water that has bacteria in it, and that water percolates down through the ground. So if you've got fissured rock, it's not very good because it goes too fast through the ground, and there's not aerobic bacteria sort of dealing with the organic matter that's left, because you will get little bits of organic matter going out into your drainage field. If it's clay, what will happen is eventually all the holes in the clay just get clogged up with little bits of matter, and so your drainage field starts to fail. And then if it rains, then the rain will then sort of wash off of that and take that into neighbouring streams maybe. Also used to be that you could take your septic tank off into a ditch, and then a ditch, or even into a stream, and a ditch would be connected to a stream. And all of that was allowed. And basically that EU directive said, well, this is causing actually a lot of problems. And so in 2015, 1st January 2015, finally the regs changed. And if you want to go into a stream, if you want to go into surface water, you cannot use a septic tank now. Okay, there now you have to use what's called a packaged sewage treatment plant. And Andrew is talking about, or his question is about, so a biodisc is like a Hoover is a vacuum cleaner. So it's a type of packaged sewage treatment plant. And what a packaged sewage treatment plant does is it uses aerobic bacteria to break down the poo. So the poo still settles out. It's more sophisticated, because it will be divided into different chambers. So the poo will come in and settle in the first chamber, and then only a little bit, there'll be a dip pipe going to the next chamber. And the aerobic bacteria are more effective at breaking down the poo than anaerobic bacteria. But aerobic bacteria require air to work. Therefore, you have got to put a source of air in. And normally that is done by a pump. Now, the biodisc might actually, so you just pump air in. So the aerobic bacteria have got air, and obviously the poo, which they can eat, so they're happy. They just eat it, breathe the air, multiply. And what he's talking about, the biodisc might be one that actually just works, so it uses less energy, because what it does is it has a rotating disc inside, and then as that disc comes out, then it comes out above the water level, so then you get some air, and then the aerobic bacteria go, air, great, you know. And so it's sort of done like that. But the whole point is that what you are doing there is you are saying there's two things. There's suspended solids and there's something we call BOD. Suspended solids are little bits of poo that haven't sunk or haven't formed that crust. And BOD is how much organic matter is in there that when the poo or the effluent gets into the environment, whether that happens to be in the ground or in a river or stream, how much, it's called bacterial oxygen demand. So how much oxygen will the bacteria need? How can I explain this? So if it goes into a river and you've just put in a whole pile of poo into the river, what will happen is the bacteria will go, well, hey, poo, brilliant. They'll start eating it. They'll start to multiply. They will then take the oxygen from the water, which means that there's less oxygen in the water for fish. There's less oxygen in the water for plants, oxygenating plants or different plants that need it. The other thing is that because you're putting in a whole pile of nutrients, because that's basically what poo is, then you will get eutrophication, you'll get algal blooming. So all of these things are a real issue. So we don't want nutrients in our water supply. And your packaged sewage treatment plant gives you certainty that you will not be putting nutrients into the water, which the septic tank does not do.
Let's rewind a step for a moment. So if we just took all of that off-site and pumped it into something and moved it away, does that happen with any system that they just say, well, we'll capture it all and you can go and process it somewhere else? Or is that hugely inefficient to be doing it? And you obviously have lots of deliveries that you've got to do twice a year or whatever it might be.
Okay, so you're saying cesspool.
I don't know. What's the difference between a septic tank and a cesspool?
All right. So a cesspool, to be fair, I don't even think cesspools exist out there. They're there, definitely. But I don't think you would be allowed to put a cesspool in now. Maybe you would be allowed to, because I suppose that's certainty. It doesn't go into the environment. But yeah, absolutely. You've now suddenly got to pay somebody, and this isn't twice a year, depends how big you make the cesspool, because you've got to pay somebody to come in, pump it out, and then take it to a sewage treatment plant and pump it into the sewage treatment plant. So environmentally, it's a really bad idea, and it's very, very costly anyway. So if you're not connected to mains drainage, you would deal with it on site, and you would deal with it on site basically with a packaged sewage treatment plant, and then discharge that into a drainage field, because you can no longer just have a soak away, or you would have a packaged sewage treatment plant and then discharge into a stream or a river. If you were discharging to ground and you didn't want to have the packaged sewage treatment plant because of the electric cost of it, yes, okay, then you could go for a septic tank. But you would then still need to treat, in your drainage field. You see, if you're there all the time, if you're living in your house all the time, yes, there's an electrical cost, but you're getting that certainty of good quality effluent that then is going into your drainage field. You don't maintain it. Somebody comes out. Basically, what they will do is they will empty the septic tank. So they don't take out the effluent. They take off that crust over the top, and they take out the stuff, the poo at the bottom or the sludge at the bottom. They empty that in that way. So that's what the septic tank is. But there's no moving parts in the septic tank. Okay, so that's the maintenance has to be done with that. With a packaged sewage treatment plant, they would still come out and, in effect, basically desludge it, but they would also then check that the pump's working properly, so you would have maintenance like that. Everything needs maintenance, and also now you have to show that you are maintaining your system. That's also part of the new regulations. And the other thing is, even if you have an old existing system, so you have a septic tank system, you still have to prove by 2020, though, how that's going to happen, given they've only just brought the regs in. But you're having to prove by 2020 that your system is working and that you're maintaining it properly. Yeah, but I think at the moment that's such a massive undertaking, and it's such a small amount of time. This is why the Environment Agency is concentrating on new build now and just saying this is what we want. Actually, let's just make sure that the new things that are going to go in are good. And the other thing that's quite interesting is that the Environment Agency are actually now saying that if you are near to mains drainage, you have to go into mains drainage.
When you're on your mains drainage and the sewage is taken away, then you don't tend to get smells. Are smells something we should be worried about going down one of these other routes? Because I don't know, the idea of doing this all on site, I understand that sometimes you have to, but I don't particularly like the idea, and I don't know whether that's a common thing.
You wouldn't put your septic tank or your packaged sewage treatment plant right next to the house. You'd put it as far away from the house as you can. There are certain regulations, off the top of my head, I don't know, that anyway you can't put it right next to the house, but that's less to do with smells, that's more to do with foundations and stuff like that, because you're building a big pit and putting it in. But yeah, the drains smell, but normally you don't smell the sewers and the drains out in the street because they're trapped. You always have a vent pipe on either your septic tank or your packaged sewage treatment plant, and yeah, you'll get a bit of a whiff of sewage, but only sewage. Just a bit of drain smell. It's not a big smell.
On our projects as well, we seem to heap a lot on architects. Who does all the drainage and comes up with what you would have for a house anyway, or is that back to me? No, I don't like doing things on my project.
Well, what I would say is that most architects don't know about drainage. It's not something that they learn when they're studying to be an architect. If you go and work with a large architect's firm, then they will just employ drainage engineers. Of course, what happens is that on a small job, there isn't the money to employ a drainage engineer. So basically the builders will do it. The builders know how to do drainage because they do drainage.
They have to do it. They have to put it in.
Yeah.
Let's bring this one home then. Is there anything else on this general topic? We're building a new house. We want to connect the sewage in. Yeah. Have we gone around it okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like, because Andrew sort of asked that thing about SUDs. Yeah. He asked that
what is that?
About SUDs. Well, you see, I think SUDs are sustainable drainage systems, but actually SUDs are to do with rainwater, not foul water and wastewater. But I think what he's talking about there is that you do have other options over and above septic tank and leach field, over and above packaged sewage treatment plants. You have things like reed beds, constructed wetlands, willow trenches. You have different options where you can deal with your foul water and wastewater on site that can sometimes be seen as environmentally a better option. And in effect, they are something that you can put in instead of your drainage field, because you still have to have a septic tank. All of those systems still don't want poo just going into them. So you still got to have the septic tank at the beginning or something, and it's normally just a septic tank, so that the poo can settle out. So, but it's a way of treating the effluent that then goes out if you can't have a drainage field. And often people say, oh yeah, I'm going to go for a reed bed because that's going to bring biodiversity onto the site, for example. Now, most reed beds use common iris, so it's called Phragmatis australis, which is just flax iris or something like that. There are much better ways to get biodiversity onto your site. Bat boxes, lots of different bird boxes. Think of the planting. Think of, hedges everywhere. Don't get caught up in this, that's my way to bring biodiversity on the site. I've just heard that so often as a sort of a sound bite, and it drives me mad every time I hear it. If your ground conditions are such that a leach field isn't going to work, if you haven't got a nearby stream or ditch even that leads to a stream that you can discharge your effluent from your packaged sewage treatment plant into, if you're on a site where you don't live there very often, then you still have to have your packaged sewage treatment plant running all the time, because if you haven't got it running all the time, the aerobic bacteria haven't got any air and the aerobic bacteria will die. So in a situation like that, it makes more sense to put a septic tank in. But then if your ground conditions for your septic tank doesn't allow you to put in a drainage field, then you've got other options. Okay, so after your septic tank, you can have reed beds, and you get horizontal flow, or you get vertical flow reed beds or horizontal flow reed beds. Sometimes they're called constructed wetlands, and sometimes constructed wetlands are something different. I'm just at this point going to tell you about this brilliant book. It's called Septic Tank Options and Alternatives. It's by a guy called Phelim Hartley. It's actually written for the Republic of Ireland, but so much of it is relevant to the UK situation. And it's just that in Ireland, constructed wetlands are a specific type of reed bed that always has water in, whereas in the UK, we generally say that vertical flow reed beds don't have water in them, and they just rely on aerobic bacteria. And then horizontal flow reed beds have water in all the time, and they're much more used for nutrient removal. But all of these things can be put onto your site if you can't just put in a standard drainage field, because you either have got fissured rock, so you can't use it because the fissured rock, it will just run through too quickly, or you've got very, very clay soils. And there are lots of different options. So one of the options that you can do, and I'm sort of currently working with somebody, and she's looking at that as an option. She's got failing septic tank, and this is basically, it's called zero willow field zero discharge, and you plant willows but in a bed that's surrounded by plastic, and that just gets flooded with your effluent, and then the willows take out the nutrient and evapotranspire all the water out while they're growing. So there are lots of different options out there, and he's not paying me to do it. He doesn't even know that I'm saying about his book, but I just think it's just like such a really good overview, and it also, not just for new build, but also it tells you what to do if you've got an existing septic tank that's failing. And there is nothing else like it out there, and I just think people should read it.
Cath, it's always fun to catch up with you. Cheers.
Cheers, mate.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session. They're at houseplanninghelp.com/179, where you can review the key information. Also got some photos and diagrams embedded into the show notes. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, just head down to the bottom and we'll link you across to ECH2O Consultants, to Cath on Twitter. And we've got a bonus today as well, because Cath's rather proud of a stand-up gig that she did recently. I think this is very specialised. This was on the topic of being a plumber in a world of engineers. But it's good. I've watched it, so go and take a look. We'll embed it at the bottom of the show notes. All of this today at houseplanninghelp.com/179. Finish up on a hub update, and we're really close to moving our existing hub members into Hub 2.0. This is the relaunch, the revamp, which I've wanted to do for a while, but it's definitely the right time. And I suppose at the core, it's about making the community experience much better. So you'll be able to set up your own progress log where you can journal how you're doing, maybe some frustrations we can chip in with our experience as well. Or perhaps there's someone doing a similar project to you that you just want to keep an eye on and get inspiration from that person. So you'll be able to do that. Also, another big factor here is just the navigation, making it easier to get to the information you want. And over time, we're trying to build up this roadmap of just getting your self-build done in a sensible way, investing the time, doing the research, but just trying to take the pain out, or as much of the pain as we possibly can. We're always going to be refining. So get yourself on the VIP early bird list if you're not a hub member already, and you'll be notified as soon as we fling open the doors again. houseplanninghelp.com/join. That's your lot for today. Thank you so much for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.